Hello everyone, my name is Benjamin Yoder, and today for the Patreon I'll be recording, we're trying to use some of my backlog of stuff to kind of give you guys some content. So one thing I thought might be kind of interesting, if you didn't know, I've been writing about video games for over 10 years now at this point. So I've written a lot of articles over the time, and some of them are good, some of them are bad, probably majority of them bad, but I thought it would be kind of fun to basically randomly pull an article out and basically see if you know, one, read it out loud. So if you're not going to read my articles ever, then here's a way to consume it otherwise. But then also maybe offer some commentary along with it as well. I'm not sure really the best way to deviate, like what's me reading the article versus what's me just making a comment about it. Probably just a change in my tone initially here, but maybe in the future we'll find some way to make that work. So the first thing I pulled was actually a series of articles I did. I pulled like the third in a series, but I decided to just go ahead and do all three. And that was a series of Dark Souls play diaries I did. Because at the time I was just trying to find other ways to cover games, and I never did anything quite like this otherwise in the future. I think it might be kind of somewhat inspired by the old style of Let's Play, where, you know, you would write up posts and things like that, rather than like a recording of somebody actually playing through it live. So this is a series of 3 Dark Souls things I wrote, basically just my initial impressions, my feelings of why I did not like the game actually, and just kind of go through that. And like I said, I might offer some commentary here or there, you know, just kind of poking fun at myself or you know, saying if I still agree with something, or maybe if I don't agree with it. So this is from October 7th, 2011. So at the point of this going up, it's going to be over 10 years since I played Dark Souls. And essentially, like I said, this is a series of kind of like play diary entries. So it's going to be more conversational to some degree. And there's also some information about like how I was kind of covering games at this time in here as well, which is kind of interesting. So yeah. Anyways, to get started here, here's the beginning of the article. So I have a particular strategy with my subscriptions to Gamefly. I fill my query with basically every new game coming out, just so I can stay on top and get exposed to some newer titles. I wish I still did that today. My personal preference typically skew to random titles, old and new. And after an extreme lack of interest in Demon's Souls, I didn't intend on getting into Dark Souls. But as with every other new game coming out that isn't Madden, it was on my Gamefly list, so sure enough, Gamefly opted to send it to me. With zero expectations, I figure it could go in either way. With zero expectations, I figured it could go either way. Sorry. And also, I'm probably not going to be editing these, by the way. My initial impressions, not so good. From what I've heard, Demon's Souls is all about dying. I wouldn't doubt them, since that seems to be what Dark Souls is all about as well. Death during combat is inevitable, and it requires you to rethink strategies or even what path you take to get somewhere. There's some tedium, as every time you die, all the enemies respawn, but it just gives you more reason to not lose any of your precious health. Does that make sense? It just gives you more reason to not lose any of your precious health. I guess more intense in terms of, like, you know, making sure you maximize your resources, right? Where death is just flat out annoying in Dark Souls is in the random deaths. Within the first 15 minutes of the game, you are semi-teleported or something onto a platform. Before you even get the chance to survey your surroundings to determine what to do next, an enemy below the platform destroys it and you die. Good job. Go back. Replay the level, basically. Of course, the next time you approach, you know to get off the platform, but the first time you encounter this, there's no way you'd think to jump off the platform almost immediately, especially in the early game when you aren't familiar with how deadly fall damage is. I think that's the point of that initial thing, though. Like, here's my commentary afterward. That initial death you do is very much meant to teach you how the death mechanics of that game work. So I understand why I'm complaining about it, because it is like kind of a weird frustration initially, but in hindsight, I think that makes more sense. Anyways, getting back on. One cheap death was annoying, but within the course of another 2 hours of me playing, there were multiple of these. Flaming barrels rolling downstairs with no time to react, random high-level enemies that you can't judge until you hit them or they hit you, and then fairly hidden elements to the environment, like a ladder in a small corner behind a brick wall you're supposed to find while a giant boar creature attacks you and enemies hail arrows on you. The idea here is you're supposed to read notes that the players leave online to warn you about events. Unfortunately, if no one has left a note, you walk right into these events and die, I assume. And in many cases, die. Come back and in many cases, I die, come back, and there's a note after I died to whatever had killed me. Without those warnings, you're basically punished for no reason beyond the fact that you're actually progressing in the game. It's like an extreme form of backtracking. I've heard people compare the death system to the Mega Man series, but the difference in pacing changes what is, in Mega Man, a quick climb back to the top into a long, painful, and tedious journey that you have to take every single time the game decides it's time for you to die. Either way, I'll keep playing for now. I'll talk other elements of the game in the future entries. I just mainly want to get out one of the more pressing issues I had. So there's Play Diary 1. We're going to go ahead and go through all three here real quick. I think they're all fairly short for the most part, or at least they definitely got shorter afterwards. So this next section here is focused on combat. So here we go. Raging about random deaths aside, I kind of wrote it like I was continuing the same article though. Raging about random deaths aside, if there's one thing in Dark Souls I can say I enjoy, it is the battle system. I've seen Dark Souls labeled as a hack and slash title before, and to a certain extent, that is definitely true. But going in and flailing your arms about won't get you anywhere. Watching your enemy is key to success. Like a lot of titles, Dark Souls battles require the player to watch their enemy and strike when there's an opening. But in Dark Souls, the sense of urgency when doing this is a lot higher. Being able to attack your foes at just the right time often leads to their death, as you can strike multiple times without fear of them being able to retaliate. When played correctly, enemies can be taken out in a single combo in Dark Souls. I don't know why I said it in Dark Souls again. Sounds easy, right? Sounds easy, right? The difference here is that the enemy is essentially on the equal footing. Let me start that over. Sounds easy, right? The difference here is that the enemy is essentially on equal footing as you. If they manage to strike you, there's a good chance they're not going to hit you just once, but multiple times. At least early in Dark Souls, even on a heavily armored job, I guess class, I don't know what they call them in Dark Souls, heavily armored job, getting hit more than once is simply devastating. After 3 to 4 hours, you're lucky if you're still alive. Approaching even the smallest enemy requires the exact same caution as approaching a boss. Even taking a single hit is wasted health. Without a way to restore potions, without turning back and respawning all the enemies, being wary of every foe is a must in order to advance in Dark Souls. Unfortunately, this is exactly why I feel the random deaths in Dark Souls just don't fit the title. Unlike Mega Man, I keep bringing up Mega Man. I must be playing Mega Man around this time. I should go look and see when I was actually writing about Mega Man, because I did play like 4 games back to back. Unlike Mega Man, where you can quickly run back to your last point of depth, Dark Souls requires an extreme amount of precision during combat. This makes the title incredibly slow paced. I'm not sure how those two things relate. This makes the title incredibly slow paced. After 3 random deaths, not including any normal deaths via combat, fighting the same enemies over and over again gets incredibly tedious, especially when, depending on the foe, each fight can take upwards of 30 seconds. That last paragraph was something there. And the last one here. Oh no. Unfortunately, I've already sent Dark Souls back to GameFly. I think I could tell within the first 10 hours it was a title that would require much more time than I could give it in a rental. So for now, it's being pushed off. But I wanted to cover one last topic about the game to get all my final thoughts out. Specifically, the fact that it seems like I was playing a different game compared to everyone else. Oh boy. Back in the days of retro gaming, oh boy, what am I going into? Back in the days of retro gaming, any title that had some sort of exploration element generally had a challenge to it. Specifically because it was difficult to tell exactly what you're supposed to do. In Dark Souls' case, you can easily find your way forward within the game as long as you're smart about the foes you attempt to engage. But at the end of the day, I was left relatively confused as to what I was doing and how to approach situations. Talking to a coworker of mine at the Speed Gamers made me realize how much I didn't know about the game. At times, it felt like I was listening to him talk about an entirely different experience. He would reference things that I had some knowledge of, but the title never explained, while expecting me to make use of it. We'd talk about what I did and how he'd approach these situations. Even with hearing about tactics or items, it felt like I was getting half of the story Even when hearing about tactics or items, I felt like I was getting half of the story as, when put into practice, it never seemed to work out just as explained. I can't recall where at the moment, but I'm pretty sure during development, one of the developers at From Software said that they were going for that classic NES gaming feel. Talking to other players was recommended, if not required, to really tackle a game head on without a strategy guide. With whether or not that's a good thing is kind of hard to say. It really depends on how accepting you are of that fact. Going into Dark Souls without any prior knowledge, you'll be lost as heck. Go back to the original Legend of Zelda, which is considered a classic, and you'll have the same experience awaiting you. Personally, I do think encouraging conversations about games creates a feeling of community around the title. Worst case scenario, if you're determined to beat a game, there's a strategy guide out there to guide you on your way through. I didn't think the game was necessarily bad, just at times a bit unfair to the point of frustration. Killing the player without giving them the tools to defend themselves is just bad design. Meant to simply just, for the lack of a better word, troll the player. Oh boy, troll the player. 2011, boy. Difficulty in the past was largely used to extend the experience. While there's definitely a healthy balance of difficulty and progress, Dark Souls seems to push the balance over. I say there's a healthy balance of it and then say it pushes the balance over. That's contradictory. Sure, the player messages are meant to help, but if you don't have any messages at the time regarding a situation, the frustration of death bears upon you. So I don't necessarily think like my opinion on this game is necessarily bad at this point in time. And I think I actually had to like clean up this article a little bit. I gave them different titles and everything because I think they're originally just called Play Diary 1, 2, and 3. Now they have actual names to each section. But yeah, like I don't necessarily think my opinion is bad as much as it is just like the experience I had was bad. Like if somebody came into Dark Souls without any, and this is all me just talking now at this point, this has nothing to do with the actual text, but like the experience, if you come into Dark Souls without any other like input from somebody, it would be really frustrating, I think. And you know, to some degree, I think people get excited about that, right? Be able to jump into a game, have no idea what's going to happen, and have to really figure it out. But as somebody who just kind of wants to get through a game and play through it, that just doesn't really fit with me. But it sounds like I did generally enjoy the combat. I think the more of the bigger problem with the combat itself was just like the frustration with the loss of progress every time you died at any point kind of thing. So, you know, I've never really had a lot of desire to go back to Dark Souls, and even after reading this, like, I don't think I do either still. I think the combat's probably the big draw to me more than anything, but the actual, like, exploration aspect of the game never really appealed to me, and maybe the game's got better with that aspect. Keep in mind, this is Dark Souls, so it's only the second game in this, at least Soul series, right? You could argue that Kingsfield kind of falls within a similar space, but anyways, I don't think that was, like, a terrible set of write-ups, but I think it would probably be I think I write it in a definitive way, like saying that it's a it's just bad design. That's too definitive in that particular case, in my opinion. It didn't work for me, obviously, and I think today I probably would still get frustrated, honestly. But at the time, I think I just was a little too strong in my words, which I think inevitably is something that everybody does when they're like in their early 20s writing. I was 21 when I was writing this, right? So anyways, that's it though for this. Thanks for coming. Let me know if you have any thoughts or feedback on this, if you give it a listen. I will probably try to continue to do more of these just because they're going to be easy to kind of slap together and put out. And, I enjoy kind of going back and reading these things and, thinking about them, seeing how my thoughts have changed over the years. But surprisingly with this one, I think I largely actually am pretty close to how I feel today, not having played any more Dark Souls games since then. But just the way I word it and maybe the emphasis on certain parts of it, I think I would reduce to some degree in terms of writing about it. So anyways, thanks for coming. OneControlPort.com is the website. If you're listening to this, I might make some of these free at some point just so people get an idea of what they're listening to. So if you're listening to this, subscribe to the Patreon if you want more of this kind of stuff. And yeah, that's it. Have a great week. Bye.